Well, I know some of you might be a little nervous when I get up here because you might be thinking, she's going to talk about choir recruitment. She might be staring at me and making a little eye contact, but just relax. I'm not going to talk about that today. That's for another day. Just know it's coming, and I'm not looking at you right now. But today I want to talk about my story, and I was thinking about that getting ready this morning, and I thought, no, this is God's story. It's not really my story, but He used me, and I hope He continues to. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, raised in a Baptist church since I was 2 weeks old. At the age of 7, I was baptized, and around that time it was discovered by my family doctor that I had a heart murmur, which led to finding a hole in my heart, which was atrial septal defect. So at the age of 8, I had open heart surgery at Duke University with the chief of staff, Dr. Saviston. He had a doctor my age, and he wanted to do the surgery, which was unheard of. Well, I'm the baby and the only girl in my family, and I'd always heard that I was spoiled rotten to the core, and I was so proud of that until I knew what rotten meant. And this whole storyline just continued with the chief of staff being my doctor, and there wasn't room on the ward, on the children's ward, for my mama to stay with me, and there was no way she was leaving her baby there, but that she couldn't stay with her in the room. So Dr. Savis instead, we have a room on the adult ward, and we'll put her on the adult ward, and so that my mom could come and stay with me. The nurses spoiled me, of course, with all the grape juice that I wanted to drink. And the last night that I was there in the hospital, I went to the bathroom down the hall. Being independent, I wanted to go by myself. And there was a woman in there crying, and I asked her, "What is wrong?" And she said, "I'm having surgery tomorrow, and I'm afraid I'm going to die." And I said the only thing I knew to say, "Well, God's going to take care of you. You just pray and ask Him, and you'll be okay." Well, she went back to her room, and she told the nurse that she had seen an angel in the bathroom and that God was going to take care of her. And when she was well, she was going back to church. Well, that was my first experience of God using me and knowing He had a plan for my life. I moved to Sheridan, Arkansas when I was 15 years old, living in Greensboro, North Carolina, #1 city in America to live in. And here I am in Sheridan, Arkansas. It was the weekend Elvis died, and I arrived on Saturday and started school on Monday. Our assembly was in that big gym, and there was a big sign that said, "No smoking or dipping." And I thought to myself, what in the world is dipping? Little did I know, I was living in the redneck capital of Arkansas. It was interesting. But again, God had a plan. I graduated from OBU with my music degree. That's where I met my husband, Arnie. And he was the first Methodist that I ever dated. And to my mother's surprise, I married him. And after he finished his master's degree at the U of A, we moved to Prescott, and then we landed in Texarkana in 1992. I was pregnant with Elizabeth, my oldest, and the next 6 years I took off from teaching, and I stayed home with my girls. Alexandra came along 22 months after Elizabeth. Well, I went back to teaching at Pleasant Grove. Elizabeth entered kindergarten, and I was busy teaching and working with Arnie's color guard, with his band, and my girls. And at that time, I remember that I was not particularly feeling close to God. I was just doing my own thing. I was still that spoiled little girl where it was all about me. And I just thought, what's going on in my life? Where's God? We just go through those different times. I was getting close to my 38th birthday, and I remember thinking, I don't like the idea of turning 40. It was early in October when I felt a little sting in my chest, and I rubbed it to soothe the pain, and I felt a lump. My doctor's initial thought was it was superficial, but after testing, it showed that it was a cancerous spot beneath. So I went to UT Southwestern, where George Peters was my surgeon, who he was also associated with the Susan G. Komen Foundation. And after the lumpectomy in November, I woke up in my room. The air was cool and crisp, and I could see that big ball of lights of the reunion tower through my window. And my mother told me there's no lymph node involvement. And I said to her, "Mom, do you feel that? Do you feel the presence of God right here?" And she said, "Yes." And I'll never forget that feeling. Surgery followed with 6 months of treatment and 7 weeks of radiation, and God blessed me with a positive attitude. Somehow He allowed me to still work, and even though the last treatments were hard, I was able to still feel normal. I had some really cute wigs, and I remember a friend of mine saying to me, "I thought you were going to lose your hair." And I said, "I did." It was important for me to stay strong for my children, and I didn't want to be afraid. I explained to them that there were just some bad bubbles in there that needed to be taken out, and the strong medicine might make me lose my hair. And when your kids are small, it's really scary to think of them losing their mother. But what helped me, especially at night when I was trying to go to sleep and those bad thoughts would come, I'd just think about the things I was grateful for, and all that fear would go away. So when 40 came around, I was thankful. 40 was great. And I was so thankful to get older, and it was a blessing and not a curse. We were moving forward as a family, built a beautiful home that we had dreamed of and planned for, thought things were good until about 7.5 years later, after the first diagnosis, there came another. Arnie went with me for a regular checkup at UT Southwestern, and we had a wonderful day planned with lunch and shopping. But several spots showed up on the opposite side as before, and we were there all day, ended up with a breast MRI and biopsy. And after an anxious weekend, it was confirmed that there was a different type of cancer, not a recurrence. But because of my history, I had a double mastectomy with reconstruction. It was a 14-hour procedure that consisted of removing breast tissue, followed by taking flaps of skin from my back to aid in the reconstruction. Most of the time, they used the skin from your stomach, but because I had been on a lung heart machine from my heart surgery, I wasn't a candidate, even though I had I was overweight at the time. And so I told my doctor, I knew I'd been saving that back fat for something. They just took that around, moved it, and there we were. So now I'm around 45, and the girls are in middle school, and I didn't want them to be emotionally scarred by my physical scars. So we went through all of the reconstruction, all of it with every little different thing you got to do. It's about a 2-year process. But because of the 2 different types of breast cancer that I'd had, they tested me, and I had the BRCA1 gene, which is a mutation that makes women more susceptible to both breast and ovarian cancer. So at that time, I had my ovaries and fallopian tubes removed as a precaution. And this forced me into early menopause, which proved to be one of the most difficult obstacles to overcome. Not only me, but for my whole family. And if Arnie was here right now, he'd stand up and say, "Amen." Because I was like crazy for 2 years, and I couldn't take any medicine. So any of you who have been through that, you know what that's like. But just as before with my treatment and my surgery, I relied on God through it. I knew I couldn't get too hung up on the current step. I had to look to the future. I just had to learn to cry out to God. And at night, through the emotion and depression and fear, when I felt I had nowhere else to turn, there He was. Finally, things were getting back to normal around 2012. Elizabeth had gone off to college. Alexander's graduating from high school, going off to college. Arnie had a new job at TISD, and I soon went over there too. And I was teaching middle school choir at the Texas Middle School when I was having some symptoms of acid reflux. And could you blame me? Middle school? Are you kidding me? It's hard. But in September, I had a test planned to go in to stretch my esophagus for scar tissue, but the scope revealed some spots again, and it was cancer on my esophagus. I remember that day after tests, waiting in the room, another CAT scan. And you know, in those waiting rooms, it's cold. And at the end of the day, we walk out into the warm sunlight, and I said to Arnie, I don't understand. As he stands there looking at me with this devastated face. And I said, I don't understand, but all we can do is trust. We just have to trust. Now, this time was a little different. I was 54. I couldn't work. I was having my treatments, and my doctor recommended me. I stayed in Dallas for all these treatments. So fortunately, we found an apartment from a local church through a Methodist church there, through the American Cancer Society, called Ark House for patients like me. And I had an apartment for 5 weeks for $140 a week. It was amazing. I couldn't teach, but I kept working here because God had called me here the April before I was diagnosed. And I resisted that. Just like Joan in the well, I was like, I'm not worthy, I can't do that. God pushed me for a year to come here, and he knew what was ahead and knew I needed to be here. But I couldn't teach, but I could still come and be part of my choir, coming to church on Sunday. And that connection continually restored my energy and my hope. In addition to my family and friends, church members, they would take shifts driving me to Dallas for treatment on Monday, then back to Texarkana for Wednesday for choir rehearsal. Thursday morning, a different person would take me, and we'd drive to complete my treatment for the week. The rounds of chemo and radiation were tough, and it made eating difficult, but God and my church got me through. I eventually had surgery, an esophagectomy, where they removed the esophagus, used parts of my stomach to create a new one. I was on a feeding tube from February to May, 22 hours a day. Eventually, I weaned off that feeding tube and learned to eat again, just smaller portions. When I met with the surgeon to go over the details of the removal of my esophagus, of course, he had to go over and review all my medical history. He wanted to know about my heart surgery. I told him I had surgery at Duke University, and he said, who was your surgeon? And I said, well, the chief of staff, Dr. Sabiston. And he stopped, and he reached out his hand. And I took his hand, and he said, I studied under Dr. Sabiston. He was a giant, and I can't believe I am working on one of his patients. Only God can do that, put us together. There was immediate connection. As I was preparing for surgery, which later I was told to be one of the most complicated surgeries on a human, gotten a call from the tumor board that they had been studying my case, and some of my friends were in town. And I got it that Friday afternoon. They wanted me to come in Monday morning for 2 biopsies, one in the lung, one in my stomach. Well, I couldn't sleep that night, that weekend, for knowing what was ahead. I went to our guest bedroom and got down on my knees, and I began to pray. I prayed for my family, prayed for my children, and I prayed for time. The first diagnosis I prayed, I want to see my girls grow up. The second diagnosis I prayed, I want to see him graduate from high school. The third diagnosis I prayed, I want to see my daughter get married. The biopsies just revealed scar tissue. There was no other cancer. And I just could go on with my regular surgery that was planned. Elizabeth got married, and her husband loves to volunteer. He was helping their church, putting couches in some apartments that they owned. And we found out that he was putting couches in these apartments from Richardson Methodist Church called the Ark House, where I'd been staying. I have so much to be grateful for. So many that have helped me along the way. Elizabeth was my full-time nurse. She was upset that she did not have a job, that she graduated in December and didn't have a job from January to whatever. But God knew that too. God put her at home, taking care of me, because I didn't know I was going to need a full-time nurse 24/7. Because some of the medication they gave me, I had symptoms from Parkinson's. So when I got home, instead of getting better, I got worse and I got worse. I couldn't get up in my bed. I was on the couch at home. Elizabeth was in the chair beside me sleeping at night. And I laid there thinking, God, you did not get me through all of this to leave me like this. We didn't know that it was just a medication reaction. I was thinking, I'm going to be on a feeding tube the rest of my life. But God said no. They realized it was just a medication reaction, and thank goodness I recovered from that. My family's been beside me. My husband's been with me through thick and thin, and I couldn't ask for a better one. We've always been close, but as you can imagine, this brought us much closer. So I'm now 62 years old. It's been 8 years since my last battle with cancer. And I've had more than one doctor say to me, you know you're a miracle, right? An abnormal miracle, but because by no way am I normal. I've had doctors tell me that as well. But no matter what happens, I know God will take care of my family and my girls. They are different and special now because of what they've been through. And I never really asked why, but I have thought, would I want to be the person that I was before? Would I want to be that selfish, I'm still a spoiled brat, that'll never be out of me, but would I want to be that same person? No. Would I go back and change it? No. With each battle, something new was revealed, and I'm thankful for the process of the journey to change my heart, my dependence on God. And I look back and I understand. I believe every scar, every painstaking change was God crafting me beautifully and wonderfully by His design. In church, I once heard someone speak about the miracle of the pearl and how the pain and discomfort of it and how the pearl is formed. And that's what God does. He takes something painful, ugly, scary, everything that cancer is, and if we trust Him, He turns it into something beautiful. Thank you.